Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't choose the Pentagon. It chose me by the accident of a badge and a hallway at the right time. On day 0, I was 2 floors down from the river entrance, coffee cooling on a console in a windowless room, with clocks set to Zulu and Pacific. We'd been watching shaky feeds of traffic on I-395 creeping south like a glacier, blue strobes swallowed in a brown wave of stalled cars. No one wanted to say the word outbreak yet. They said civil disturbance, abnormal presentations, and mass casualty. And then the phones began to ring and would not stop. My name is Aaron Vale, civilian emergency planner attached to a joint staff directorate that, up until that morning, did tabletop exercises and argued about stockpiles. I'm not a hero. I know part numbers better than battle drills. My crowning achievement before the world tilted was reorganizing the emergency food pallets so they were easier to count during audits. That little habit, touch every box, know every shelf, might be why I'm still alive to tell you this. The Pentagon has a geometry that resists panic. 5 sides, 5 concentric rings, radial corridors carved like spokes. If you've never been here, the building feels like a loop that's always bringing you home. But that first hour, sirens, security radios popping with overlapping voices, someone sprinting past with a trauma kit, the loops didn't soothe. They trapped noise and fear. Colonel Hart, our acting installation commander, once the Joint Chiefs stopped answering as one voice, made the decision the moment he saw South Parking flood with people. "Lockdown," he said to the room, voice level, eyes bright like he was reading a checklist. All external doors sealed. River entrance becomes controlled ingress. We triage. Anyone who can contribute, we put to work. If they can't, we protect them. He looked at me. "Vale, I need the map of essential systems. I want to know how long we can breathe, drink, and see in the dark." I carried a folded map the way some people carry photographs, air handlers, risers, emergency generator lines marked in pencil. The Pentagon's walls are thick, more like a dam than an office building. Beneath it, sub-basements, mechanical rooms, things with floor drains and catwalks. Not bunkers in the movie sense, but places built to ignore weather and time. And yes, there are hardened spaces. People assume the building is all glass and bureaucracy. They forget the era it was born in and the one it rebuilt itself for. When the first group reached the river entrance, a dozen in all, a security officer in a reflective vest ushering them like a crossing guard at the last school on Earth, we had our intake line ready. Gloves, face shields, a taped mark every 2 meters on the marble. A corpsman named Ortega checked pulses and pupils. We asked the questions that already felt inadequate. Any bites? Any fever? Anyone chasing you? A man in a suit clutched a briefcase like it was a lifeboat. Behind him, a woman wore running shoes with a pencil skirt. Her steps were sharp and deliberate, her fatigue carefully hidden. A child, his hand in his mother's, looked up at the ceiling lights as if they were stars. They watched us as we watched the glass doors, and beyond the glass, the thin slice of lawn that separated us from the Potomac and the world. "Seal it," Hart said again, quieter this time. The welders took their places. We turned the Pentagon into a refuge because the wall thickness and the door frames said we could. But concrete isn't a plan. People are. We learned the building anew in that first week, the way the floor slopes almost imperceptibly to drains, the pre-staged sandbags in the maintenance sheds, the place where the catwalks run like secret hallways above the E-ring. We learned which loading bays were choke points and where a Humvee could anchor a barricade like a cork in a jug. We rolled the heavy steel bollards out of their hiding places and set them like chess pieces along north and south parking approach lanes. We put sandbags on the roofs because the roofs gave us eyes and because a bag of sand is dignity for someone who wants to help. They stacked, they tamped, they made tidy parapets around the corners with the best fields of fire. We scavenged thermal sights from an armory cradle and mounted them to rifles whose serial numbers I had once only known as entries on a sign-out sheet. We issued weapons to those who had trained and had a steady heartbeat while looking through a rear aperture. We locked the rest away because a fortress is safest when its tools aren't temptations. We found drones, rotary wing quadcopters from a training program, their Pelican cases dusty but complete. Leo Novak, a communications tech whose hobby was tiny aircraft that shouldn't fly but do, made them our satellites. He swapped out a chipped rotor arm with a ballpoint pen spring and some tape, then sent the drone skimming the tree line along Boundary Channel Drive. The video feed painted with sunrise, then with smoke. Heat signatures, Leo said, pointing at his screen, where a pale flock drifted along the Mount Vernon trail. They moved without formation, but not without pattern. Closer to the river's steady hush, they slowed. When a horn blared on I-395, they turned as one. If you ask me, when I understood this wasn't going to be a short march through chaos to order, it was then, the sight of a dozen figures aligning like iron filings near a magnet pulled by sound and brightness. We didn't know whether the infection changed their hearing or whether it was just the last human habit still running. Curiosity. Muffle everything, Hart said. Tape over any light that blinks. We learned to breathe like a library. Day 3, I took my first inventory walk through sub-basement mechanical rooms with Maya Chen, a structural engineer who had come in as a contractor 2 months ago to consult on a cooling tower retrofit. She wore her hard hat even when it was just us and pipes. Merely a psychological device, she said, tapping the brim, but I'll take whatever helps. We stepped through a door marked with a number and a letter into a space that smelled like iron and dust. The air handler stood like an industrial cathedral organ, access panels secured with quarter-turn fasteners, filters in frames like picture windows. Maya touched the sheet metal the way a veterinarian touches a horse, feeling for vibration. She can run for a while, she said, if we can feed her, but the filters are finite, and I don't like what's outside making friends with what we breathe. We re-rigged the ventilation with manual bypasses so we could run on low without starving the rooms of air. We taped foam around seams and turned a mechanical engineer's whiteboard sketch into reality with hose clamps and prayer. We moved racks of MREs into a mezzanine and set up a simple hydroponics trial in a service corridor. PVC pipe, net cups scavenged from a supply room, water drawn from a standpipe we tested with a meter. Romaine and basil, because they grow like hope. Hydroponics in the Pentagon, I said. I don't know whether to laugh or salute. Maya wrote down a pH reading. Laugh first, she advised. Saluting is for when you know the plan works. We had plans layered like armor. Perimeter, Humvees hard-nosed into entrance lanes at North Parking and South Parking. Bright paint scuffed and dignified with welded rebar grills. Kill zones. We hated the phrase, but used it because names matter. Segmented with jersey barriers and arranged to funnel anything moving towards sightlines we could manage. Interior. Stairwell doors blocked with steel bookcases, their shelves still neatly labelled with budget binders that would never be opened again. Skylights in certain atriums covered with plywood and sand, more for noise control than anything else. We walked our drills like we used to walk the building to meetings. Turn left at corridor 9, cut across C-ring, exit to the service yard, check that the backflow preventer is locked. Civilians learn to say copy into radios and to move at a trot instead of a run. The Marines taught them to breathe into the sling, to keep the muzzle down, to lean on a wall instead of their shooting elbow. Even those who would never fire a shot learned the language because language makes order out of fear. What's your lane? Became the most important question. Electricians took the generator lane. Diesel, filters, the little hum that says we're still a civilization. Former cooks took the ration lane. MRE boxes into lots, lots into days. Days into fairness that people could taste. Librarians catalogued supplies and wrote lists on foam core sheets with black marker. Letters a hand high, pleasant and patient. Water distribution 070009001700, 1900. The act of making a schedule is a kind of mercy. People stood where the boards told them, 6 feet back, quiet, grateful that numbers and lines still had meaning. "Tell me the truth," Hart said to me one night in the command center. A conference room turned into a brain with too many eyes. Outside, somewhere far across the river, something boomed. "How long until we start losing people to the quiet?" He meant the attrition that comes when the body is safe, but the mind keeps replaying a siren it can't turn off. 7 days, I said. 14 for the stubborn ones. We'll need tasks, rotations, rituals that make time heavier. Church without the church, he said, almost smiling. We can do that. We did. Not hymns, but morning musters, where the new plan of the day was read aloud and everyone had a line to carry in it. Not confession, but debriefs where we said what hurt, what worked, what would be done differently tomorrow. Not sacraments, but little things. One person appointed each week to announce at supper time something beautiful they noticed that day. The way the sun hits the E-ring floor at noon, a logistics clerk said once. And 20 people went to see it the next day, and for 15 minutes they all stood like they were at an art museum, which, in its way, they were. It took a week for the first organised approach to our fences that felt different than a drift. We had learned the way they moved. Stumble, pause, turn toward a sound like an owl before it dives. But this time, on the drone feed, they came in a loose wedge between 2 lines of cars on Route 27, not fast, not smart, but purposeful in a way that made the scout prickle. Leo panned the drone left, right. "No sirens," he said, as if apologizing. "I swear we've kept our noise down." Vibration, I thought. The generators through the ground, the heartbeat of a building. We had rehearsed this. The sandbags, the lanes, the rules of engagement that felt more like instructions for a controlled burn than a battle. We had agreed. After a long debate between a captain who had been to places where streets turned red and a public affairs officer who had never fired a weapon, that we would speak and write about what we did without words that turned people into targets. There would be no gloating, no swagger, just steps to keep people safe. Positions, Hart said, same as drills, quiet first. The quiet first meant foam ear pads under the muzzles where they rested on sandbags. It meant suppressors on rifles where we had them, not because we thought we were Navy SEALs, but because the building had learned our voice and would carry it through the rings if we weren't careful. It meant a line of eyes watching through optics to track left and right, communicate targets without shouting. You would be amazed how little voice you need if you trust a hand signal. In the end, it looked less like a shooting gallery and more like a harvest. Deliberate, proportionate, not a hero among us, not the way movies tell it. We let the wedge reach our first funnel and then thinned it in the narrow. It was terrible, in the original sense, to face the remains of people and calculate arcs and backstops and the way concrete chips when a round hits. It's something I won't describe in detail. You're here for a story you can listen to, not one that will slice your sleep. After, we sandbagged a little higher. We mopped the floors even though they were clean. We wrote down the ammo expenditure and the strain on everyone's faces. We added a new ritual, quiet tea, as someone called it. After an action, 2 kettles went on in a break room that had a picture window we kept shaded. People came, hands still shaking sometimes, and took a paper cup. No speeches. You don't talk down adrenaline. You let it climb down a ladder. That night, Leo played the drone footage again. The wedge had formed 50 yards north of a patch of pavement where a moving truck idled, its cargo door open. In the back of the truck, a diesel generator throbbed like a heart. "Sound," Maya said, hands on the table, fingers still with a little powdered sugar from a donut someone had found like treasure. They cluster around steady sound. Not shouting, I said, not cars passing, the continuous. Like a refrigerator hum, she said. Like an HVAC unit. We looked up at the ductwork and listened to our own building breathing. We move the generators, Hart said. We isolate vibration, hang the units on shock mounts. Anything that hums, we decouple, or we turn off and run intermittent. We make the building quiet on a frequency we can't hear. You're talking about turning a war headquarters into a recording studio, Leo said, grinning despite himself. Let's do it. We scavenged rubber from loading dock bumpers, hung the generators on straps like swings, and put weight under the legs that stayed on the floor. We switched to LED lanterns in certain corridors in the evening and trained ourselves to do without the comfort of a steady, mechanical hush. The building, stripped of its baseline, felt like a cathedral after midnight. It worked. The next time a cluster formed, it was smaller, and it formed further out. The Pentagon was teaching us what it had always known. Defense is mostly planning, made quiet. By day 12, our quarrels were no longer about where to place a barricade. They were about where to place people. The military hierarchy worked like a spine the first week. Everything snapped to it and stood. But the longer we stayed, the more the civilian body flexed back. Who eats when? Who sleeps where? These are constitutional questions when you're living inside a shape as famous as our five-sided one. At a town hall-style meeting in the A-ring, a circle of chairs, a whiteboard on a rolling stand, marker squeaking like a bird, we argued our way into a structure. Former soldiers formed a training cadre that ran 2-hour blocks morning and afternoon. Firearms safety, radio procedure, first aid, basic engineering. Civilians signed up because in a world like this, competence is the most attractive thing. Engineers set up a hydroponics team and a maintenance team. A librarian named Stacy catalogued every skill on a yellow legal pad. Plumber, software developer, speechwriter, pastry chef. Everyone is a resource, she said, and she meant it in the kindest way. That night, 2 men who had never sat at the same table before, an infantry sergeant who wore his hair high and tight, even with no regulations to enforce, and a community organizer who had shown up day 2 with a backpack full of bottled water and a voice made for megaphones, co-wrote the schedule for guard rotations. The sergeant taught the organizer how to draw a sector diagram. The organizer taught the sergeant how to make sure people actually showed up for shifts with smiles instead of grudges. Samir Qureshi, a Navy lieutenant who had been on his way to a med school interview when the world went sideways, turned a corner of a basement into a clinic with a privacy screen made of office cubicle walls and a medicine cabinet scavenged from 2 pharmacies and a dentist's office. We're doing preventative care like it's gold, he told me, because it is. Tetanus shots, hydration, sleep. I treat arguments too. That's inflammation of the soul. What do you prescribe? I asked. Listen, then send them to move something heavy, he said. Endorphins are free. We found ourselves making decisions with weights on both sides. An armory rack had 6 rifles, 2 shotguns, a handful of pistols, and 4 suppressors. Who gets the quiet tools? A nurse who has never fired a shot, but volunteers for every risky supply run. Or a former marksmanship instructor who could make a magazine last like a miracle. We decided more than once that a weapon is not just a weapon, it's a symbol. Sometimes the person who needed the confidence boost got the suppressor, not the person with the best score on paper. It worked more often than it should have. On the 10th night, a rumour ran the rings like a breeze. A group across the river near the wharf was calling themselves a militia and had erected barricades of their own. They had a loudspeaker. They had claimed a radius of 3 blocks and a dozen boats. We should be out there, said a young private with the last name Santos, jaw set the way helmets are set. We're the Pentagon, right? We don't stay in the motor pool while the city tears itself up. We will be out there, Hart said. But we hit singles before we swing for the fences. We build a supply route. We recon the bridges. We test radio relays. We create a corridor we can clear and hold and retreat from without leaving anyone behind. Then we go meet our new neighbours. He pointed at a map where he had drawn circles like ripples spreading from a stone. Stage 1, internal. We lock this place down, make it livable. Stage 2, perimeter. We own everything between here and the river. Stage 3, bridges. 27, 395. The pedestrian spans we can feasibly clear. Stage 4, outreach. The wharf, Pentagon City, Crystal City. Maybe farther, but not on day 10. Santos sat down with the look of someone who wants to be in chapter 20 now. I recognized it because I see it in the mirror. The first true external mission became what people still call the pharmacy run. It didn't sound like much. 2 box trucks, a security detail, a clear route identified both by drone and by the memory of a Pentagon police officer named Jeremy, who commuted past Pentagon City every day for 15 years. Car lanes are choked, he said, tapping the map. But the service road behind the mall is usually clear by morning. We go early, we keep lights off, we stop if we need to and wait in the quiet. We're not fighting our way in, we're strolling like ghosts. I volunteered to go, and Hart let me with a reluctance that made my chest warm. You're good here, he said, with your lists and your wires. But we have to know how to do this, and you have to see what it will take. That's the bargain. We rolled out a little before dawn, tires whispering, every loose item tied down so nothing rattled. We had radios on low gain, earpieces we wiped with alcohol. Overhead, the sky was that pre-light blue that makes you feel like the city is holding its breath. The drones had shown small numbers near the boundaries. The larger clusters still drifted nearer the attractions. A digital billboard that could not quite be turned off. An HVAC unit on a rooftop that ran because no one had found its switch. We were learning our enemy's magnet fields. We reached the pharmacy with a click of a lock cutter and a moment of collectively held breath, while Jeremy eased the security grate up. Inside, it smelled like mint and cardboard. We moved as if muscles themselves could make noise. We took everything that could prevent more emergencies than it could treat. Antibiotics, antihistamines, insulin sealed in coolers that had not yet warmed. Blood pressure medication, gloves, syringes, bandages. I looked at a shelf of candy and wanted to shove it all into a bag for morale. But we were not thieves. We were librarians who only checked out what the index allowed. On the way back, we took a different route, because good luck likes variety. The drone showed a line of figures on the Mount Vernon trail facing the river. They stood evenly spaced, as if observing a moment of silence. We killed our engine at 100 yards and coasted. We passed them with the windows up, watching straight ahead. They did not turn. The river hissed like a radio between stations. Back at the Pentagon, someone had drawn a grid on the wall of the clinic and labelled it with drug names and dosages. Samir's handwriting was tidy and forgiving. "We won a week," he said, "if nobody falls down the stairs." "Then we put guardrails on more of them," I said, and he laughed and then didn't, because it was true, and like most true things, impossible and necessary at the same time. By the 3rd week, fuel became more than a number on a clipboard. The generator's thirst shifted from "we should track it" to "this will decide what stays on." The Pentagon's central plant had diesel in underground tanks, and we had what we had. The math looked manageable if we ran at reduced load, and if we could bring in more. The closest caches were easy to locate on a map. Getting to them, not so easy. "Fuel mission," Hart said, looking around the room at faces that had leaned over more maps in the last 20 days than most people do in a long career. "We plan it like a convoy, but we think like we're carrying glass. We will not outrun trouble. We will go still when we must." We made the case for the airfield first. Reagan National across the water, tanks and trucks, and a chain-link fence that had never been intended to stop people who no longer measured threat like we did. "Too exposed," Maya said, tracing with a pencil. "Too many sightlines we don't control, too much river on one side and too much highway on the other. We've built our kill zones here. Over there, it's theirs." "The heating plant across Boundary Channel Drive," I said. "Smaller cache, but perhaps manageable, and the road is ours if we make it." "Make it how?" Santos asked, eager again. Corridor, Hart answered. We do what cities do during marathons. We control every side street with an obstacle. We mark the route with chalk and symbols that mean quiet to us and nothing to anyone else. We station teams with whistles, but no whistles. I want hand signals taught to anyone standing watch. We've been drilling. Now we do it. It was something to see, our people in reflective vests that we had coloured over with grey marker to dull their shout, standing at intersections with cardboard arrows that simply read route, and a picture of an ear with a finger to lips. Passing a side street, you could see down it, the way an empty city holds secrets in every window, and you could feel the way the noise in your head could become noise in the world if you let it. The trucks rolled. I jogged beside one for a stretch, breath even, clipboard under my arm. The air had a crispness that made me think of first day of school. On the overpass, a paper sign we had taped to a railing lifted its corner, family route, an arrow pointing back toward our door. We were building a vocabulary for movement. At the plant, we found the valves where we thought they would be, locked and labelled in a way that made my heart like a hymn. We pumped fuel into our tanks with a portable unit the size of a refrigerator, hung on shock mounts like everything else we'd learned to hush. It took 40 minutes. We spent 30 of those watching the tree line for drift. The last 10, we watched each other and counted breaths. On the way back, a small group stepped into the corridor from a side road, as if they'd been waiting. They walked like people who had been running, and had only now remembered how to walk. One held up a hand. We stopped because you stop when you can. We made the same list of questions. We added one that had become a part of intake somewhere around day 15. What do you know how to do that makes you proud? Weld, said a man, whose eyes kept returning to a particular patch on his sleeve that had once borne a logo. Teach fourth graders, said a woman in sneakers and a coat 3 sizes too big, her hand on a boy's shoulder. Fix elevators, said a petite person with a pack that made their shadow look like a mountain. We said the magic words. We have a place for all of that. Back at the Pentagon, we added 2 more beds, split our water a little farther, lowered our lights a little more. We updated our chalk maps. We taught more hand signals. The first real human conflict within our walls came from something as old as fire. Who gets to hold the matches? We had resistors, not to the plan, but to the idea that the plan had owners, a group of civilians led by a man named Kruger who had once run an event production company and wore his hair with a tidy part even now, made the case for an elected council. Chain of command works for operations, he said at a whiteboard meeting, but this is a city now. Cities do not appoint mayors by rank. Hart listened, arms crossed, his jaw flexing in a way that told me he'd spent years masking disagreement by thinking of his next question instead of his next argument. What would your council decide? He asked. Allocation, Kruger said. Who gets the suppressors? Who goes on the dangerous missions and how they're compensated? What we trade with others when we start trading. The big picture. Compensation? Santos muttered, not quite under his breath. We're already compensating, Kruger said, responding to the tone more than the word. We're fed, we're housed, we're protected by people with weapons and skills. But if we don't acknowledge the soft work, the teaching, the cleaning, the watching, the hour someone spends reading to a child so their mother can sleep, the hard work will be a bitter seed, and bitter seeds grow quickly. I expected Hart to dig in. Instead, he nodded. Draft a structure, he said. Make it lean. No committees that meet only to schedule more meetings. Elections in 7 days. Our constitution is the plan of the day, but we can annotate it. That is how the Pentagon got a council. 12 citizens and uniformed members who sat with their backs to a map each evening and listened to reports not just from security and engineering, but from the kitchen, the clinic, the classroom. It didn't solve everything. Nothing does. But it gave us a place to take frustration where the answer could be, we hear you, instead of stand down. The clustering behaviour grew, like a rumour that turns out to be true. On drone footage, we saw groups align with clockwork regularity around quiet machines that hummed and bright screens that stayed bright. A tuned generator attracted more than a siren because it promised a constant. We adapted. We made decoys. Maya and Leo built what the Marines nicknamed lullabies. Sound modules the size of lunchboxes, each with a speaker that emitted a steady band-limited tone that mimicked mechanical hum better than a generator ever could. We set one on a rooftop on the other side of Route 27, another near a sculpture along the river path, a third inside an empty bus whose destination sign still read Pentagon. We watched on the drone as the nearest wanderers gathered along the bus like commuters waiting for service. We placed the decoys on a timer that dimmed and quieted gradually, like a shop closing at the end of the day. The clusters dispersed or stayed, still and even, like sunflowers that had decided the sun was behind them now. It wasn't a trick to eliminate, it was a tool to shape space. Who knew we were going to be city planners? Stacy the librarian said, drawing a symbol on the corridor map to mark a decoy's location. A small square, a dot, a line. We need a legend, she added, professional to the bone. We made one and taped it up. Silent corridor, supply route, decoy, watch post, first aid, school. Yes, we made a school. 2 hours a day at first. Letters for the littles, algebra for the bigs. A history lesson for everyone taught by a reservist who had taught high school and knew how to make the Peloponnesian War sound like last Tuesday. The morale boost was unreasonable. People get tired of not growing. The first day, a child brought Maya a drawing of lettuce under lights. She cried and pretended she was just allergic to basil. The day everything almost came apart, I was doing the thing I do best, counting. I had positioned myself in a supply room off a corridor that smelled like old printer ink and lemon cleaner, untaping a box of gloves. Through the door, I heard a voice I recognized from the meetings getting louder. Kruger, and another voice, lower, the sergeant. The words weren't clear at first, but the tone was. Not enough to go around, the sergeant said. We assign based on mission. And the missions are assigned by you, Kruger countered. Do you see the circularity here? This is not a symposium, the sergeant said, and if you've ever heard someone make one word into a judgment, you know how he said it. I walked out into the hall, not because I thought I could stop anything, but because if you show up when a fire starts, sometimes you can keep it to one room. A cluster of people had formed in a half circle. The object of their attention sat on a rolling table, 2 suppressors and a thermal scope. 2.5 pounds of argument. Gentlemen, I said, trying to sound like someone who reads the plan of the day on purpose. What if we are not, in fact, deciding about metal, but about trust? Kruger turned. We are always deciding about trust, he said. That is precisely my point. Then choose publicly with criteria, I said, stealing by memory from a book about accountability. Make it boring. Do it every time, and decide now to rotate this equipment in 4 days. Everyone knows the schedule. Everyone knows the names. The only debate is whether the criteria were met, not whether the person has a friend in the right corridor. The sergeant studied me with a look that said I had either offered a solution or wandered into a fight with a placemat. Criteria like what? He asked. Recent mission participation, calm under pressure, evaluated by 2 observers, willingness to train a replacement, physical ability to carry out a role at 2 in the morning without becoming a liability, and, I added, because the room needed it, how much someone needs a win this week to keep going. The murmurs shifted, softer. Kruger nodded. The sergeant flicked his eyes toward the 2 devices, and then toward a clipboard like he was seeing it for the first time. We'll write it down, he said. It will be on the wall, Stacy called from the back, holding up her marker like a sword. Legible. We put the list up under a title in block letters. Assignment criteria. People came by and read it like it was a menu. Arguments continued in the building, of course, because humans were here. But the arguments had a court to go to. That night, I slept on a couch in an office that had a view, if you peeled back the shade an inch of the river under moonlight. I thought of how the Pentagon had been built fast during another emergency, and how its strength was not just in concrete, but in the habit of moving a lot of people and things through small spaces without crushing anyone. We were tapping an old vein. When the horde came, the big one, the one that would have been an airshow of sirens in the old world, it didn't come like a wave, it came like weather, distant smudges on the drone feed at first, then flow patterns that connected those smudges in a way that made the math majors swear softly. They were not coordinated in the sense that a flock of birds is coordinated. They were coordinated the way raindrops are coordinated when they all decide to find the same gutter. "Where are they headed?" someone asked in the command room, the map pinned like a butterfly. We watched the drone tilt and pan. "Everywhere," Leo said, "but more towards steady emissions, the city's last whispers." We cut our decoys, all of them, with a command that felt like an act of mercy we couldn't afford. The clusters, deprived of their nighttime bus stops, began to drift. We shut down non-essential fans. We hung blankets over doorways inside the Pentagon like a household preparing for a cold snap to keep warmth in the rooms where people slept together, that old village tactic. We looked at our barricades and didn't like them anymore. You never do on the day you need them. "Plan Redoubt," Hart said, using the name we had written and hoped not to say. "Inner corridors only. Humans and resources withdrawn to arenas we can defend with the fewest sectors. Rovers along the inner loop only. Sandbag crews, stand by. 2 snipers to the roof with thermal. They are there to spot and to discourage only. We're not posturing here. We're lasting." Maya stood next to me at the whiteboard, drawing a loop within a loop. "Our building is a labyrinth," she said quietly. "Today we make it a walled garden. We moved. You would have been proud of us. People carried mats and crates and children with their good sneakers on. We rolled medical carts into a protected corner where our improvised clinic was now behind 2 doors instead of 1. We turned off lights in rings like ripples. The central areas lit just enough for safety. The edges of the pentagonal world went night. The horde reached the fences like a fog bank reaches a cliff, not with impact, but with the certainty of touch. We heard it not in noise like you'd expect, because we'd starved the place of noise. We felt it in the way air changes when many bodies stand close. The drones showed the lawn at the river entrance lined with figures in a quiet formation that would have sealed the fate of a less steady place. We did almost nothing. This is the part of the story that will disappoint the part of you that wants a charge and a countercharge. We held our ground, yes, but we did it by being a less interesting target than the city behind us. The cluster, starved of the steady and rewarded only with the occasional bark of a rifle when one approached too close, began to spread and seek. "Patience is tactical," Hart said under his breath, as if to convince the muscles in his jaw. After 3 hours, the line at the river entrance had turned into a scattering that was only remarkable because we knew what it had been. After 6, the drone feed showed more interest in the freeway, where, half a mile west, a commuter bus's dead battery was still making some small mechanical song we could barely hear. Kaylin, a young woman who ran the kitchen with the precision of a ship's cook, set out soup on a rolling cart in the center of the inner loop. People ate without talking the way people do at funerals and weddings. I walked a circuit with Stacy, counting faces, because that's how we count days now. A child tugged on my sleeve. "Do you think they hear each other?" he asked, chin up, eyes a clear grey that reminded me of how the river looks when it decides not to be a mirror. "I think they hear the world," I said, "and the world is loud even when it's quiet." He nodded like that was an answer and ran to show someone his cup of soup like it was a trophy. By midnight, the lawn was mostly empty again. The barricades, which had been lampposts we could lean on, felt like decorations after the parade. I wanted to celebrate, to call for cheers, to let the building breathe the way people cheer after a plane lands in a storm. Hart shook his head when I said as much. "We will do that tomorrow," he said. "Tonight, We keep the muscle memory of quiet. We kept it. I slept in the chair next to the whiteboard. Dreams of pipes and lettuce and the theodolite of a drone's gaze folded into a sleep that felt like falling into the inside of a shell. On day 29, the council met with the block leaders for the first time. They weren't called block leaders officially, but that's what they were. People who knew their stretch of corridor, who knew which light flickered and which person needed an extra bottle of water at night. They stood around the map and told the room what their corners needed. Every ask came with a give. If we can get a hand truck for that end, we can turn the laundry faster. If the classroom moves one door over, the clinic can expand, but the classroom gets half the big whiteboard. It was bargaining the way cities bargain, and it made me feel something like peace. We made contact with the wharf not because we wanted a fight, but because we wanted a neighbour. The drone held position on a rooftop, while a small team took a boat across in daylight. Our ledger system on a clipboard that might as well have been a flag. They waved. The people on the pier waved back. They had a battery of speakers, but they were turned off. They had boats. They had fish hanging on lines like Christmas ornaments. Trade? Our team leader mouth-formed, hands open. They nodded. A man in a Nationals cap held up a container of disinfectant wipes like a relay baton. Our people held up a bag of rice like a peace treaty. It took 3 trips to formalize what we would later call our silent market. No shouting, no claims of territory, no laws other than the consequences of noise. But it worked. The city began to stitch itself with threads made of flour, vitamins, conversation in a low voice, and a new unit of value, the quiet hour. People traded for shelter from sound, the way they used to trade for shelter from rain. We met one of the wharf's leaders on the 4th visit, when the world had warmed just enough to make the breeze smell like water instead of stone. Her name was Ria, former parks planner, eyes that measured shade like resources. "We thought you'd come earlier," she said without accusation. "We thought about it," I said. "We wanted to come right." "You did," she said. "We saw your decoys. Smart. We've been doing something similar with light. Under cabinet strips on dimmers under cardboard hoods. Shadows are your friend." "We learned that with our skylights," I said. And for a full minute we talked like professionals at a conference table, sharing strategies, until the sea reminded us where we were with a little slap against a piling. "Keep your counsel," she said. "Even when it annoys you. It steals the oxygen from the arguments that would otherwise consume you." Back home, we layered that advice into the plan like another sheet of plywood on a door. The council would decide on any new expedition. The block leaders would have veto if the mission would starve their areas of caregivers. The guard schedule would get its own column on the whiteboard, next to the school and the kitchen, because it was not above or below those things. It was next to them, as necessary as grammar. A month and a half in, the Pentagon had become something I could have seen once and not recognized. The parking lots, once oceans of sedans and SUVs, were now broken into little rooms by concrete and creativity. Planters made of cut barrels held lettuce under netting. The roofline bore sandbags, as if the building had grown a crown. Inside, the once glossy corridors had an honest patina from footsteps that meant something. The maps were smudged and updated. The whiteboards had layers of ghost script beneath the present tense. We had lost 3 people. I won't tell you how, because there are only so many stones I can carry into the night. We marked their names on a narrow strip of paper, and we taped it under a sign that said, "Remember." The strip never fluttered in the air conditioning, because we had quieted the building that much. We gained 39, children who ran a little too fast, elders who walked a little too slow, and therefore taught us to shape up our days with patience. Skilled hands I never would have guessed at. One man who could rebuild a generator from parts that looked like a junk drawer. A teenager who could make a radio antenna out of coat hangers that found the Coast Guard like it was a neighbour. A woman who had never been camping in her life, who could now get a fire going in a steel barrel with a single match and a prayer. We turned the Pentagon into a refuge and then, without a ceremony, into a neighbourhood. It was never as safe as a house on a cul-de-sac, and it never will be, But safety in our new measure is a tide, and we learn to predict it. In the end, what saved us was not the thickness of the walls or the depth of the sub-basements. It was the decision, every day, to treat the plan like a living thing and each other like the plan's only point. We fortified, we rationed, we trained, we argued and wrote it down. We made decoys of hums and turned off the lights we didn't need. We found neighbours. We said copy into radios and please into kitchens. We made a school. We grew lettuce and faith. If you're listening to this because you want to know how to hold the Pentagon, the answer is simpler than you want and harder than it sounds. You make the building quiet enough to hear each other, steady enough to share, and boring enough that the world outside decides you are not the loudest problem to solve. You'll still fight here and there, with the discipline of people who know the cost of noise. You'll still lose sometimes, but you'll stack sandbags and teach a child long division and carve a little morning into the map where the sun hits the floor at noon. We are still here. The river entrance faces a lawn where the grass will need cutting someday. The hydroponic pipe drips like a metronome. The generators swing quiet on their rubber cradles. The building breathes, less like a beast and more like a bellows in steady hands. Tomorrow, we start step 2 of the old plan, beyond the river. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.